The bet started, like most terrible ideas, over wine. It was Mara who brought it up. She was sitting cross-legged on Sophia's kitchen counter, glass in one hand, the old Coven registry open on her lap, and she said it the way she said everything matter-of-factly, like she was reading the weather. Lucian Dragici hasn't smiled in 400 years. Sophia was stirring something on the stove. Not a potion. Just soup. She had been trying, lately, to be a normal person at least twice a week. That's not a fact. That's a rumor. It's in the registry. The registry also says old Hannah turned a man into a goat because he parked in her spot. He did park in her spot. Sophia turned around. Mara was holding up the page. And, sure enough, there it was, Lucian Dragici, king of the northern vampire courts, last documented emotional response recorded in 1643. A single line note from some long-dead Coven watcher, * subject remains in complete emotional withdrawal. No attachment observed. No attachment expected, * Sophia read it twice. Someone actually wrote no attachment expected in an official registry. 700 years will do that to a person. Mara closed the book. Or whatever he is. Sophia put her spoon down. She had that look on her face, the one Mara had learned to be afraid of over 15 years of friendship, head tilted slightly, eyes a little too bright, the corners of her mouth doing something small and dangerous. What if someone tried? Mara set her wine down. Sophia. Not to hurt him. Just, what if someone actually tried to get through to him? Properly. With intention. He's killed witches. Not recently. Sophia. I'm just saying. Everyone writes him off. Everyone keeps their distance. But, nobody's actually, she gestured vaguely with the spoon. Nobody's actually tried to connect with him like a person. Mara looked at her for a long moment. Then, she picked her wine back up. Fine. I'll bet you. Sophia blinked. What? I'll bet you. 30 days. You go in there, you try your absolute hardest, you use everything you've got, your charm, your magic, your ridiculous optimism, and, if you make Lucian Dragici show any genuine emotional warmth toward you. Any. A smile, a soft word, anything that isn't contempt, she paused. I'll give you Grandma Yelena's spellbook. The room went very quiet. Grandma Yelena's spellbook was not a small thing. It was a 400-page handwritten grimoire with spells that had been lost everywhere else. Mara had inherited it. She slept with it under her bed. Asking her for it was like asking someone for a kidney. And, if I lose? Sophia asked. You cleaned the Coven meeting hall for a year. Every Saturday. With your hands. No magic. That's disgusting. The floors are disgusting, yes. Sophia looked at the registry page again. No attachment expected, something about those 3 words sat wrong in her chest. Not dramatically wrong. Just wrong the way a crooked picture frame is wrong, nagging, small, impossible to ignore once you've seen it. Deal, she said. Mara did not look surprised. She looked like someone who had just watched a person agree to walk into a fire with a paper umbrella. Getting access to Lucian Dragici was not the hard part. Witches and vampires had a formal diplomatic relationship, tense, old, full of rules nobody remembered writing. Sophia filed a formal visit request through the Coven Council, listed her purpose as cultural exchange and diplomatic dialogue, and waited 4 days. The reply came on black paper, in silver ink, written in handwriting so perfect it looked like a font. Miss Vane. You may come. Do not bring salt. Do not bring iron. Do not attempt to ward any room in my house. You will be given 3 days. L.D. * 3 days, Sophia thought. She had 30. She'd figure out the rest once she was inside. The Dragici estate sat at the edge of a long valley, past a town that had stopped growing sometime around 1910 and never started again. Sophia drove there herself, in her second-hand Volvo with the cracked passenger mirror, because she had decided that arriving in something normal and slightly falling apart was better than arriving in anything that suggested she was trying to impress him. She was not trying to impress him. She was trying to outlast him. The house was large. That was the word. Not haunted looking, not dramatic, not draped in dark atmosphere the way people always assumed. Just large. Old stone. Windows that were too tall. Gardens that were clearly maintained by someone who cared about precision but had no interest in softness, everything trimmed to sharp edges, nothing allowed to grow wild. Thomas met her at the gate. He was older looking, for a vampire, which meant he had been old when he was turned. He had the kind of face that belonged on a coin. He looked at her Volvo, then at her, and said nothing that could be called welcoming. "Miss Vane." "Thomas. Nice to meet you." She offered her hand. He shook it once, like it was a formality he had agreed to under protest. "The king will see you at dinner. You have until then to settle in. Your room is the east wing, second floor. The west wing is private. The third floor is private. The basement is private. So basically my room and the dining room. And the gardens." He looked at her again. "Don't touch the roses." "Are they? They're his." Sophia looked at the roses near the front gate. They were deep red, almost black at the edges, and completely perfect. She had a sudden, powerful urge to touch one just to see what would happen. She did not touch one. The room they gave her was fine. Not warm, not decorated for comfort, but fine high ceilings, a bed that had clearly been made by someone who understood the geometry of linen, a window that looked out over the garden. She sat on the edge of the bed and thought, 30 days. 30 days in this house with a man who had not felt anything in 4 centuries. She took out her journal. Across the top of a fresh page she wrote, *Day 1. Currently sitting in a vampire's house. No regrets yet, * she underlined, yet dinner was a test. She understood that in the first 60 seconds, before Lucian Dragici had said a single word. He was already at the table when she came down. Seated at the far end, in the chair that was not quite a throne but was trying its best. He had dark hair, longish, pushed back from his face. Eyes the color of old wood, or old amber, or something else old that she couldn't immediately name. The kind of face that made people forget they had been mid-sentence. He was looking at her the way people look at paperwork they have agreed to deal with. "Miss Vane," he said. His voice was low, even, completely without inflection. Not cold the way rude people are cold. Cold the way stone is cold, not deciding to be that way, just being it, having been that way for so long it was the only temperature it knew. "Mr. Dragici." She sat down at the other end of the table, which was approximately 17 feet long. There was food in front of her. He had nothing in front of him. "Thank you for having me. You made a formal request. I honored it." He picked up a glass of something dark red. "What is the actual purpose of your visit?" Sophia had prepared for this question. She had several answers ready, ranging from vague to specific. She looked at him across 17 feet of table and decided to use none of them. "I was curious about you." He looked at her over the glass. "Curious? You're one of the oldest beings still living. You've seen 700 years of history. You've watched governments rise and fall, you've watched entire civilizations change, you've watched the world become something completely unrecognizable from what it was when you started. And, by all accounts, you sit in this house and feel nothing about any of it." She picked up her fork. "That's interesting to me." A very long pause. "You came to study me. I came to talk to you. There's a difference." He set his glass down. "No one comes here to talk. I know. Everyone's scared of you. And you're not." It wasn't quite a question. It was something flatter than a question, an observation being checked against available data. Sophia thought about it honestly, which she always did when it mattered. "I'm a witch. I've dealt with scarier things than a man who won't smile." something moved across his face. It was gone before she could name it. He said nothing for the rest of dinner. Days 2 through 7 were quiet in the way that large empty houses are quiet, heavily, with weight to it, in a way that pressed against the ears. Sophia learned the rhythms of the house. Lucian was awake before she was, somehow, despite the vampire mythology. He did not sleep in a coffin. He did not avoid windows, the glass was treated, she noticed, filtering out the dangerous spectrum of light while letting through everything else. He moved through the house like he owned every inch of it, which he did, but, more than that, like the house itself was an extension of his body, like he always knew where every wall was, every corner, every door. He read. That was the first surprising thing. Not old manuscripts, though there were plenty of those, but current books, recent ones, things published in the last 5 years. She found a small pile of them on the window seat in the library and ran her finger down the spines. Literary fiction. History. One novel she had read herself and loved. She picked it up. "You've read this?" she asked. He was across the room, not looking at her. "I own it." "That's not the same thing." He turned a page of what he was currently reading. "I've read it." "What did you think?" "It was competent." Sophia looked at the book in her hand. It was one of the most devastating things she had ever read. It had made her cry on a train in front of strangers. She had called Mara immediately after finishing it and said nothing for 2 minutes. "Competent," she repeated. The writer confuses sentimentality for emotion. They're not the same thing. She looked at him. He was still not looking at her. But he had said more than 4 words, which felt, after 6 days, like a significant event. She sat down on the window seat with the book and did not ask him anything else that day. She just read. On the same window seat. In the same room. For 2 hours. When she left, she thought she heard him turn a page slightly slower than usual. Day 8. She went out to the garden in the morning, because she needed air and because being inside that house for too long made her feel like she was slowly becoming part of the architecture. She walked the paths, keeping away from the roses, which were still sitting there in their aggressive perfection. She found him there. Not at the roses, on the other side of the garden, by an old stone bench, standing still in a way only very old things stood still, not restless, not waiting, just present in the way rocks are present, like being there was not a choice but a condition. He was looking at something she couldn't see. Maybe nothing. Maybe something she didn't have the years to understand. "You come out here in the morning?" she asked. "I come out here when I want to." He looked at her. "Does that surprise you?" "I thought you'd avoid the sun." "I told you." "The glass." He looked back at whatever he was looking at. "I had it done in 1987. Before that I hadn't seen a morning in 300 years. Sophia sat down on the bench without asking permission. "What was that like?" "The first morning back?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "Cold," he finally said. "The light was cold." "I didn't expect that." She didn't say anything. She'd learned already that filling his silences killed them. "I stood in this garden," he said, still not looking at her, for 4 hours. "I didn't move. I couldn't understand why I'd waited so long." She looked at the side of his face. The old amber of his eyes in morning light. The way he was holding something back that she couldn't name, the way a dam holds water, not by being unmoved but by constant pressure, by always holding. "Why did you," she asked quietly, "wait so long?" He turned and looked at her. Direct. More direct than he had looked at her since she arrived. "Because," he said, "there were no mornings left that I wanted." He walked back inside before she could respond. She sat on the bench alone and looked at the garden and thought about a man who had lived for 700 years and spent 300 of them turning away from light. She did not write anything in her journal that night. She just sat with it. By day 12, Sophia had stopped counting days. Not because she had forgotten the bet. She hadn't. The bet was still there, a small hard fact sitting at the back of everything, like a stone in a shoe. But she had stopped leading with it. She had stopped walking into every room thinking, today I make progress, today I find the crack, because that thinking had been making her stiff. Calculated. And Lucian Dragici had 700 years of practice at recognizing calculated. So she stopped. She started just living in the house. Reading in the library when she felt like it, wandering the garden in the mornings, eating her meals at the long table even when he wasn't there, talking to Thomas about the estate's history in the way you talk to someone when you're genuinely curious and not performing curiosity. She asked questions when she had them. She stayed quiet when she didn't. She stopped trying to be interesting. And something strange started happening. Lucian started appearing. Not dramatically. Not in any way she could point at and say, there, that's the moment, just, he would be in the library when she was there. He would come into the garden 10 minutes after she sat down. He would pass through a room she was in on his way somewhere else and stop briefly, with no clear reason for stopping. He never explained it. She never mentioned it. On day 14, she was in the kitchen. This was technically off limits, Thomas had not said so explicitly, but the kitchen felt private in a domestic way that the formal rooms didn't, and Sophia had the social awareness to know when she was crossing a line. She was crossing it anyway because she had run out of the particular tea she needed, and the kitchen was where the supplies were kept. Lucian came in while she was searching through the third cabinet. He stopped in the doorway. The tea's in the second cabinet from the left, he said. She turned around. He was looking at her with that face, the flat, evaluating one that gave nothing away, but he had answered a question she hadn't asked out loud. Which meant he had been paying enough attention to know what she was looking for. Thank you, she said, and found it, and put the kettle on. He didn't leave. He leaned against the doorframe instead and watched her with the manner of someone who had decided to do something and wasn't entirely sure why. You drink a lot of tea, he said. It's a witch thing. Something to do with the hands. She got 2 cups out, then looked at him. Put one back. Then, after a beat, took it out again. I know you don't need it, but do you want a cup? He looked at the cup. I haven't had tea in a long time, I'm guessing. 40 years. Why'd you stop? There was no one to make it for. He said it simply. Not sadly. Just as a fact, the way he said most things stripped of decoration, offered plain. Like someone who had stopped softening things for audiences because there were no audiences left. Sophia put the second cup back without ceremony. She didn't make a big deal of it. She just set his cup down beside hers when the tea was ready and pushed it across the counter toward him and started drinking her own. He stayed in the doorway for a moment. Then, he came in and picked up the cup. They stood in the kitchen, not talking, drinking tea. It was the most comfortable she had felt in 2 weeks. Day 17 was when things cracked. Not between them, from outside. She found out from Thomas, who came to her room at 7 in the morning with that particular blankness on his face that meant something was happening that was being carefully managed. He told her there were guests arriving. Visitors from the Eastern courts. 3 vampires, a delegation of sorts, sent by someone named Aldrich who was Lucian's. Thomas paused here, finding the right word, counterpart in the East. Is that a polite word for rival? Sophia asked. Thomas's expression shifted in a way that confirmed it completely. The 3 vampires arrived by late afternoon. Sophia met them in the main hall because she was curious, and she had also figured out, over 17 days, that showing you weren't going to hide was a form of respect in this world. The leader was a man named Soren, pale in a way that felt deliberate, with eyes like a winter sky and a smile that was warm in exactly the way a snake is warm, because it needs external heat to function. He looked at Sophia and said, "A witch. How unusual." And then, to Lucian, who was standing slightly behind Sophia without quite being behind her, "You've changed your company policy." "She's a visiting diplomat," Lucian said. Of course. Soren's smile stayed exactly where it was. Fascinating. Sophia did not like Soren. She disliked him in the fast, instinctive way she distrusted strangers who were too smooth, people who had learned to perform warmth as a strategy because real warmth had never occurred to them. She had met men like him in normal life, in board meetings and at parties, and they always left the same residue, the feeling that you had been looked at and filed away, not seen. She smiled at him pleasantly and went to the library. The meeting between Lucian and the Eastern delegation took 3 hours. She heard none of it. But Thomas found her afterward, and he was carrying a small tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. What did they want? She asked. Territorial acknowledgement. Lucian holds a piece of land the East wants. They've wanted it for 80 years. Thomas set a book down on the table. He didn't look at her. They also noticed you. I got that impression. Soren will use you, Miss Vane. If he can find a way to. He finally looked at her. He'll try to make your presence here into something it isn't. To destabilize Lucian's court. Suggest that a witch in the king's house means the king has a weakness. Sophia sat with that. Does Lucian know this? Lucian knows everything Soren intends before Soren intends it. He's known him for 2 centuries. He paused at the door. That doesn't mean the information reaching the wrong courts won't cause problems. After he left, Sophia stayed in the library for a long time. She thought about the bet, for the first time in days, in a real and uncomfortable way. Because if Soren was going to spread rumors, if her presence here was going to be used as leverage against Lucian, then being here was costing him something. She was costing him something. She hadn't thought about that before. She had thought about what she was trying to get. She hadn't thought about what he might be risking simply by letting her in. She found him in the garden that night. He was at the roses, which she had never seen before, standing close to them, not touching, just near them, and there was something in his posture that was different from his usual stillness. The usual stillness was contained. This was tighter. Held. Soren's a problem, she said, because she had discovered over 17 days that he preferred directness to approach. Soren is always a problem. He didn't turn around. He's been a problem since 1798. Thomas says he'll use me against you. Thomas worries. Thomas is right, though. She stopped a few feet from him. I haven't thought enough about what my being here does to your position. I should have. He turned around. He looked at her with that direct, flat look, the one she had learned was not coldness but attention, total and complete attention that had no warmth in it, not because warmth was absent but because it had been locked behind something that had no current key. Are you offering to leave? He asked. I'm asking if you want me to. He looked at her for a long time. The garden was quiet the way only very old land is quiet, layers of silence under the surface silence. No, he said. One word. Flat. Final. And then, he turned back to the roses. Sophia exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. Can I ask about the roses? You can ask. Why yours? Specifically? Thomas said, my wife planted them. He said it the way you say a thing you have said 10,000 times inside your head and 0 times out loud, carefully, the way you carry something that might break. She planted them the year we married. 1348, the number sat between them. She was human, he said. She died in 1351. 3 years after the roses were planted. Sophia did the other math automatically, the terrible math, 1348. The Black Death. She died in 1351. The plague ran from 1347 to 1351. She didn't say anything. She couldn't have put together a sentence right then, if she'd tried. I kept them, he said. I've replanted them 11 times. They're the same roses. Same stock. He reached out, and, with one careful finger, not quite touching, he ran his hand just above a bloom. She would have found that absurd. She wasn't sentimental. But, you are, Sophia said. It came out soft, without agenda. He looked at her sharply, like she'd said something dangerous. Then, slowly, the sharpness left. Apparently, he said. Days 18 through 22 folded into each other like soft things. They ate dinner at the same end of the table instead of opposite ends. She wasn't sure when that had happened. It was day 19, maybe she had sat down at what had become her end and he had sat not at his end but partway down, then, closer, then, they were both in the middle, 6 feet of table instead of 17, and neither of them mentioned it. He started talking. Not excessively. Not in a way that announced itself as a shift. But, where before there had been 4 words, there were now 20. Where before he had answered her questions and, then, stopped, he now sometimes continued past the question into territory she hadn't mapped yet. He told her about the first decade after his wife died. Not in detail, in fragments, the way you hand someone shards of something and let them understand the shape without laying out every piece. He told her about how time worked differently for vampires who were grieving, how it stretched, how it lost its edges, how a decade could feel like an afternoon and an afternoon could feel like a decade, and neither told you anything useful. Did it get better? She asked. Day 20. No, he said. It stopped being all of everything. That's different from better. She thought about that for 3 days. On day 22, Soren's delegation was still at the estate, stretched beyond what a 3-hour meeting required. Lucian had given them 2 guest rooms with the precise hospitality of someone who understood that refusing would create a worse problem than allowing. But Soren was doing something, Sophia couldn't name it yet, something patient and slow, working a room the way you work a room when you're not in a hurry because you've decided you have all the time you need. She came down the main stairs on the morning of day 22 and found Soren at the bottom, alone, waiting in a way that was slightly too neat to be accidental. Miss Vane. His smile. I was hoping to run into you. Were you? Not a question. I'm curious about you. He tilted his head. What exactly brought you here? A witch, visiting Lucian voluntarily. It's unusual. I was curious about him. Curious. The word in his mouth had a different texture than it had in hers. That's a warm word. Are you curious, or are you? He let the pause do work she didn't want it to do. Something else? I'm a visiting diplomat, Sophia said. Just like Lucian told you. Of course. His eyes were doing something calculating and patient. Though I wonder, does he know why you're really here? She kept her face still. She was very good at keeping her face still when she needed to. He knows everything I've told him. I see. He smiled again. It's just that there's a story going around in certain circles. About a bet. Between witches. Something about 30 days and a very old, very closed-off king. The kitchen floor felt suddenly like it was at a slight tilt. I don't know what story you're referring to, she said. No? He stepped back, courteous, creating space like he was doing her a favor. My mistake, then. Do enjoy your stay. He walked away down the hall. Sophia stood at the bottom of the stairs. Her hands were cold. The story was out. And, if Soren had it, how he had it, who had talked, whether it had come from someone in the coven who had overheard, whether Mara had told someone who had told someone, all of that was secondary to the single immediate problem: Soren was going to tell Lucian. If he hadn't already. She went to find Thomas. He wasn't in any of his usual places. She looked for 20 minutes through rooms that all felt like they were watching her. She found him finally, in the study. He was standing at the window with his back to her, and, when she came in, he turned around slowly, and his face had that quality again, managed, careful, containing something. Thomas, she said. Miss Vane. Does he know? Thomas looked at her with something that was not quite sympathy and not quite judgment. Something older and more complicated than either. He knows, Thomas said. The room was very quiet. When? An hour ago. Soren came to him first. Thomas set his hands behind his back. He told him there was a bet. That you had 30 days to make him. He stopped. That it was a game. Sophia sat down. She didn't choose the chair. Her legs found it. How did he? She stopped. What did he say? When Soren told him. Nothing, Thomas said. He said nothing at all. That was worse than anything else he could have said. He went to his rooms, Thomas continued, quietly. He hasn't come out. Sophia sat in the chair and looked at the wall and felt something she hadn't expected to feel, not guilt, she had anticipated guilt, but grief. Actual grief, the kind that sat in the chest and pressed, because somewhere between day 8 and day 22 something had happened that she hadn't accounted for in her original math. She was not playing the bet anymore. She hadn't been playing it for days. And she had no idea, now, how to make him believe that. The 30 days weren't over. There were 8 left. They felt suddenly like the longest 8 days of her life. He did not come to dinner. His seat at the middle of the table, the seat he had moved to, the seat that had started as hers and become theirs, 6 feet of table instead of 17, was empty. Thomas served her in silence. The food was good. She could not taste any of it. She pushed a piece of bread around her plate and thought about knocking on his door. She did not knock on his door. Not because she was afraid of him, but because she understood, now, enough about him to know that forcing an entry would ruin whatever small chance was left. He needed to be the one to come out. She could not drag a man who had held himself shut for centuries back open by force. What she could do was stay. She was still here. She was not packing her bags. She was not making excuses or running from the wreckage she had a hand in making. She was going to sit in this house and be present and let him decide what to do with that. She went to the library after dinner and sat in the window seat with the book she had been reading, his book, the one he had called competent, the devastating one, and she read until the words stopped connecting into sentences and her eyes were just moving across the page without taking anything in. She put the book down. Looked at the window. The garden was dark outside, the roses invisible in the dark, just shapes where the light didn't reach. You should have told me. She startled. He was in the doorway. She hadn't heard him come, but she had learned that about him. He moved without announcing it, 700 years of existing without making unnecessary noise. He was standing with one hand on the doorframe and he looked at her the way she had never seen him look at anything, not flat, not managed, not the stone-cold face that gave nothing away. He looked like something that had been holding a very heavy thing for a very long time and had just decided to set it down but wasn't sure yet the floor would hold it. I know, she said. From the beginning. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. You knew, from the day you arrived, that this was yes. And every conversation, he stopped. Every morning in the garden. The kitchen. The roses. He looked at the window, then, back at her. Was that no? She stood up. I need you to hear that. No. Not after the first week. Maybe not even after the first day, if I'm honest. He looked at her. The bet was the reason I came, she said. It wasn't the reason I stayed. It wasn't the reason I asked you about the mornings or sat in this room reading for 2 hours because I could see you were paying attention. I didn't do any of that to win something. She exhaled. I did it because I wanted to. Because you are not what I expected. You are not what anyone says you are and I wanted to know the actual thing, not the story everyone tells about you. He was very still. I know that doesn't fix it, she said. I'm not saying it does. I'm saying it's true. A long silence. The kind that takes up space. What was the prize? He asked. She blinked. What? If you won. What were you going to get? It was such a strange thing to ask, in this moment, that she almost didn't answer. A spell book. And, if you lost? I cleaned the Coven meeting hall for a year. By hand. Something moved across his face. It was there and gone, and she couldn't quite catch it. He looked away toward the window. A spell book, he said again, very quietly. It was a stupid reason to come here, she said. I know that. No. He shook his head, slightly. No, it wasn't stupid. It was an excuse. People always need an excuse to do the thing they actually want to do. He looked back at her. The question is whether the thing they wanted was real, or whether it was just the momentum of the excuse carrying them forward. She held his gaze. What do you think? He said nothing. He looked at her with those old amber eyes and she could see the calculation running, not cold calculation, not strategic, but the careful calculation of someone who had been catastrophically wrong about something before and had been paying for it for 600 years and could not afford to be wrong again. I think, he said slowly, that I don't know how to trust what I feel. I haven't practiced it in a very long time. I know. I'm not saying, he stopped. Pressed 2 fingers to his forehead briefly, a gesture so human it cracked something open in her chest. I'm not saying I don't believe you. I'm saying I don't fully trust my own, he gestured, once, helplessly. It's been a very long time since I had data on any of this. Sophia stared at him. A 700-year-old king, the most powerful vampire in the northern world, standing in a doorway saying he didn't have data on his feelings. Something warm and completely undignified rose in her throat and came out as a laugh. Just a small one. Not mocking, she was laughing because it was so painfully honest and so exactly him and so exactly what she had not expected when she had filed that formal visit request and driven up in her dented Volvo. He looked startled. Then, very slowly, like something that had forgotten how, the corner of his mouth moved. It was not a full smile. It was the beginning of one. A fraction, a suggestion, a structural report from a face that had stopped practicing. It lasted 2 seconds. It was enough. Soren left the next morning. He left without ceremony, which meant he had gotten something useful from the situation and no longer needed to stay. That was fine. That was his way. Sophia watched his car go down the long drive from the upstairs window and felt the house relax around her the way a body relaxes when a headache finally breaks. She called Mara that evening, sitting on the edge of the bed, because Mara deserved a real call and not a text. He knows about the bet, she said, before Mara could say hello. A pause. Sophia, someone talked. Or Soren found out from someone in the outer circles. I don't know. It doesn't matter. He knows. Are you okay? Sophia looked at the window. The garden. The roses, visible now in the evening light. I'm not leaving, she said. Another pause, longer this time. Sophia. Don't. I know what you're going to say. I was going to say, Mara's voice was softer than she expected. I was going to say I'm sorry. For making the bet in the first place. I thought you'd go in, have a frustrating 2 weeks, come home, clean the hall, and that would be the end of it. A beat. I didn't actually think you'd, neither did I, Sophia said. They were quiet together for a moment in the way only old friends can be quiet, where the silence holds more than the words would. Is it real? Mara asked. What you're feeling? Sophia pressed her hand flat against the window glass. It was cold. The garden on the other side of it, the roses, the stone bench where she had sat and listened to him talk about the first morning of light after 300 years of none, all of that was on the other side of this glass, and she was on this side, and the distance felt like a test. Yes, she said. It's real. Then, don't leave, Mara said. And, don't let me keep the spellbook. You don't need to win it anymore. Day 26. They were back in the garden, morning, the familiar configuration, her on the bench, him standing near the roses. But, the air between them had changed again. It had the quality of something that had been through a storm and was still standing, slightly rearranged, roots a bit more exposed. He had come out at the same time she did, without her having to engineer it. I've been thinking, he said, without preamble, which was how he always started things when he was about to say something that mattered. Okay, she said. When Anna died, Anna. It was the first time she had heard the name. It landed. When she died, I decided that the problem was attachment. That the specific cruelty of losing her was a design flaw in caring about something mortal. So I stopped. He was looking at the roses. It seemed logical. If attachment is the source of the wound, then, the elimination of attachment eliminates the wound. That's very logical, Sophia said. It was completely idiotic, he said. I understand that now. I understood it around 1700, probably, but understanding a mistake and being willing to correct it are different exercises. She watched the side of his face. The problem with eliminating attachment, he continued, is that you don't actually eliminate the capacity. You just starve it. It doesn't die. It waits. He turned and looked at her, and this time the look was not evaluating, not checking data, not managing itself. It was direct the way an open window is direct, no glass between you and the actual air. I find that, currently, it has stopped waiting. Sophia's heart did something it had not done in a long time, a clumsy, embarrassing thing that she was fairly sure showed on her face. Lucian. I'm not saying this to give you the bet, he said, a small sharpness to it. The bet is irrelevant. You came here because of it and you stayed in spite of it, and I understand the difference between those two things. Okay, she said. I'm saying it because it's true, and I've spent 600 years not saying things because they were true, and I've decided, this morning, that this is a practice I'm finished with. She stood up from the bench. She was in front of him before she had consciously decided to move there. Up close, his eyes were even more complicated, old and present simultaneously, the way very good music is old and present, made in a different time but alive in this one. For the record, she said, I lost the bet. He looked at her. The bet was about making you show warmth toward me. Genuine emotional warmth. She kept his gaze. You can't make someone feel something. You can't bet on whether a feeling will occur. All I did was show up and be honest. The rest of it, she shook her head, once. That was yours. I didn't do that. He was quiet for a moment. You stayed, he said. I stayed. Even after Soren. Even after you knew I'd found out. Yes. He was very still. Then, he reached out, slowly, with the carefulness of someone who had broken something beautiful before and was holding the lesson in both hands, and he tucked a piece of her hair back from her face. It was a small gesture. It was the size of a sentence. It landed like a paragraph. Sophia, he said. Yeah. I don't know how to do this anymore. I want to be honest about that. His voice was low, careful. I don't know the rhythms of it. I don't know how to be present in this way without panicking, some of the time. I know. I will get things wrong. I know that too. And, you're still here. She said it flat and clear and final. Still here. He looked at her for a long moment. The garden was loud with birds, the ordinary noisy chaos of a spring morning, everything alive and unconcerned. Then, fully, completely, without fractions, he smiled. Not the fragment of a smile from the library doorway. The real thing. It started slow, like something remembering its own mechanics, and it changed his face entirely, made him look younger, not in age but in some quality underneath age, something that had been waiting behind the centuries to surface. She realized, looking at it, that it must have been a very good face to fall in love with once. It still was. She called Mara on day 30. Well, Mara said, instead of hello. I lost, Sophia said. Technically. I didn't make him do anything. He chose it himself. Sophia. Did he smiled, Mara. A very long silence. Full smile? Mara asked, very quietly. Full smile. Another silence. When Mara spoke again, her voice was doing something complicated and controlled. So I owe you the spellbook. Keep it. Sophia was standing in the garden. The roses were in front of her. One of them, she noticed, had come slightly untied from its wire, a single stem reaching free from the careful arrangement, growing sideways in the wrong direction, ungoverned. She hadn't noticed it before. I don't need it. Sophia, I mean it. Keep it. Maybe let me borrow it someday, but keep it. What are you going to do? Mara asked. Stay? Sophia looked at the untied rose. Thought about a man who had stood in a dark garden for 300 years because there were no mornings he wanted. Who had kept the same roses growing for 670 years because his wife's hands had touched the first seeds. Who had, over 22 days of someone simply being present and, honest and, not flinching, remembered that he still had the capacity for warmth somewhere under all that careful winter. For a while, she said. Mara was quiet. Then, he better be worth all this, Sophia. She heard footsteps behind her on the garden path. Unhurried. Completely familiar. He is, she said. She hung up the phone and turned around. He was standing there with 2 cups of tea. His. Hers. Steam rising from both. He held one out, and she took it, and they stood together in the spring morning without explaining anything to each other, without needing to, the garden loud around them, the roses growing in every direction they chose to grow, and the day was just a day, unremarkable, ordinary, which was, after everything, exactly right. Some things don't end cleanly. Some things don't end at all. They just find a new shape and keep going, which is its own kind of ending. The bet, for the record, was never fully resolved. Neither of them ever called it anything. There was no ceremony of winning or losing, no official declaration, no moment where anyone said, "Here, this is the thing that happened." There was just a garden in the morning. 2 people. 2 cups of tea. And one very old man learning, for the second time in 7 centuries, that the thing he thought was the wound was actually the cure.